What kills your motivation after awakening isn't failure, it's success at healing. You're a butterfly fresh from the chrysalis wings, still wet, being told you should already know how to fly. But here's what no one tells you. That moment when you can't fly, yet isn't a deficiency, it's preparation for a flight you've never imagined. In the next 50 minutes, you'll discover why the void you're experiencing isn't a setback, isn't depression, and isn't a sign that your healing work has failed. Instead, you'll understand it as what Carl Jung recognized as the most crucial threshold in human psychological development, the gateway to individuation, the process of becoming who you truly are. If you've done the shadow work, processed, the trauma healed, the childhood wounds, learned to set boundaries, practiced self-love, and yet woke up one morning feeling completely empty, like every goal that once drove you has become meaningless, like every passion that once ignited you now feels hollow, like you're living in a strange twilight between who you were and who you might become. Then you're not broken. You're not having a breakdown. You're not regressing. You're standing at the sacred threshold that separates performed identity from authentic being. So what's actually happening when your old motivations die? What psychological mechanism causes the very success of healing to feel like emptiness? Carl Jung, who spent his lifetime mapping the landscape of human consciousness, understood this paradox deeply when he wrote, "There is no coming to consciousness without pain." But what he didn't say explicitly, what his work reveals through careful study, is that sometimes the greatest pain comes not from the darkness we're leaving behind, but from the strange, spacious emptiness that follows our initial encounter with the light. This isn't the pain of being wounded. This is the pain of being healed and discovering that healing doesn't lead where you expected it to lead. Let me tell you about Veronica, and I share her story with permission, because it mirrors the experience of thousands of people who've reached out to me over the years. Veronica spent 5 intensive years in therapy. Not casual therapy, but the deep work EMDR for childhood trauma, somatic experiencing, for body-stored pain, cognitive behavioral therapy, for thought patterns and extensive journaling, to process emotions she'd suppressed for decades. She faced her alcoholic father's rage, her codependent mother's manipulation, her own perfectionism, and people-pleasing patterns. She learned to say no, to set boundaries, to recognize her triggers before they hijacked her nervous system. She practiced self-compassion, body acceptance, and emotional regulation. By every therapeutic measure, Veronica was a profound success story. Her relationships improved dramatically. She stopped attracting partners who needed fixing and began connecting with emotionally available people. Her anxiety, which had plagued her since childhood, became manageable. Her career, once driven by frantic people-pleasing, found a steadier rhythm based on her actual values and strengths. Everyone admired her transformation. Her therapist was proud. Her friends asked for advice. Her family noticed the change, and some even began their own healing journeys inspired by her example. Then, one Tuesday morning in October, Veronica sat at her marketing executive desk and felt nothing. Not sadness, not anxiety, not anger, just a profound, echoing emptiness. The quarterly presentation she needed to prepare something that would have once sent her into overdrive felt meaningless. The promotion she'd been working toward seemed irrelevant. Her carefully curated morning routine of meditation, journaling, and exercise felt mechanical, like going through motions without any inner connection to why. Even more disturbing, her relationship with David, the healthiest romantic connection she'd ever experienced, felt distant. Not conflicted or problematic, just oddly hollow. She loved him. She knew that intellectually, but the feeling was muted, as if experienced through thick glass. "What's wrong with me?" she whispered to her therapist that week. "I should be happy now. I did everything right. I healed everything that needed healing. Why do I feel like I'm living someone else's life, even though it's the life I consciously chose?" This is what I call the trigger moment, the precise instant when the scaffolding of your old identity collapses and you're left standing in what Jung called the space between. You've successfully dismantled the false self, the reactive patterns, the trauma responses, the people-pleasing personas, but the true self hasn't emerged yet. You're in the liminal space, the threshold, the void. Veronica's experience illustrates something crucial. She hadn't failed at healing. Her healing had succeeded so completely that it had dissolved the very motivational structures that had organized her entire adult life. The anxiety that once drove her achievement was gone. The people-pleasing that once structured her relationships was healed. The perfectionism that once fueled her career was integrated and no longer compulsive. But here's what no one prepares you for when you remove the dysfunction that was organizing your life. You're left temporarily without organization at all. Society has immediate labels ready for this experience: quarter-life crisis, midlife breakdown, depression, laziness, lack of ambition, spiritual emergency, existential crisis. But Jung saw something different. He recognized this void as a necessary transitional space, the psychological equivalent of the butterfly's time in the chrysalis, where complete dissolution must occur before reconstruction can begin. The void isn't a mistake in your healing journey. It's proof that your healing is working at the deepest levels. When you no longer need the adrenaline of survival, the dopamine of achievement, the external validation of others, or the familiar patterns of dysfunction to feel alive or motivated, your psyche creates space for something unprecedented in your personal history, your authentic self to emerge from its own intrinsic motivation, rather than from reaction to wounds or external pressures. But first, you have to understand the deeper psychological mechanism at play, the fundamental conflict between who you've been performing as and who you actually are beneath all that performance. At the heart of the void lies what Jung identified as perhaps the most fundamental tension in human psychological development, the conflict between what he called the persona and the shadow. Understanding this split is crucial because the void occurs precisely when this conflict can no longer be maintained unconsciously. Your persona, from the Latin word for mask, is the carefully constructed presentation of yourself that you show to the world. It's not fake or inauthentic in the way we might think of those terms. It's the socially acceptable, functionally effective version of yourself that gets you love, approval, success, and belonging. For most of us, the persona develops as a survival mechanism during childhood and adolescence, when we're completely dependent on others for physical and emotional survival. You learn often without conscious awareness which parts of your authentic self are welcomed by your family, teachers, and peers, and which parts create rejection, punishment, or abandonment. The welcomed parts get reinforced and become prominent features of your persona. The unwelcomed parts get suppressed, denied, or exiled into what Jung called the shadow. Let me illustrate this with Brandon, whose story demonstrates this split in stark detail. Brandon grew up as the son of immigrant parents who sacrificed everything for his education. His father worked 2 jobs, his mother cleaned houses while studying English at night, all so Brandon could have opportunities they never had. The spoken and unspoken message was clear: succeed, make us proud. justify our sacrifices, be responsible, be rational, be disciplined. Brandon's persona formed around these expectations with crystalline clarity. He became the good son, the serious student, the responsible achiever. He excelled academically, got into law school, joined a prestigious firm, bought a house in the right neighborhood, married an appropriate woman from a similar background. His persona was flawless, disciplined, rational, successful, financially secure, professionally respected. But his shadow, the parts of himself that didn't fit this image, grew larger and more insistent over the years. His shadow contained his love for poetry, which he'd abandoned after his father said it wouldn't pay the bills. His desire to travel without itineraries, to explore for the sake of exploration rather than achievement. His need for solitude and contemplation, which conflicted with his family's gregarious, community-oriented values. His questioning of material success as a measure of worth. His attraction to spiritual practices that his rational mind dismissed as impractical. His shadow also held his grief for the childhood spent studying, instead of playing grief for the dreams sacrificed for security. Grief for the spontaneous, creative, wondering parts of himself that had been buried under responsibility. What aspects of your authentic self did you learn to hide or suppress to gain acceptance? These suppressed qualities often hold keys to your true nature. For 2 decades, this split worked. Brandon's persona earned him everything it promised: his parents' pride, professional success, financial security, social respect. His shadow remained mostly unconscious, surfacing only in dreams, where he'd find himself writing poetry in foreign countries, or in moments of inexplicable dissatisfaction that he'd quickly dismiss as ingratitude for his good fortune. But psychological splits like this are inherently unstable. They require enormous psychic energy to maintain. The persona must constantly monitor and adjust to keep the shadow hidden. The shadow must be continuously suppressed, which creates internal tension and eventually symptoms. Brandon's symptoms started subtly: chronic fatigue that no medical tests could explain, a persistent sense of being outside his own life, watching himself go through the motions. Insomnia, despite exhaustion. A growing sense that he was living someone else's life, even though he had consciously chosen every major decision. When Brandon finally began therapy in his late 30s, prompted by what his doctor called stress-related health issues, the initial work focused on integration. Slowly, carefully, he began acknowledging the parts of himself that had been exiled. He started reading poetry on lunch breaks. He took a solo trip to Italy, spending days wandering without agenda. He began questioning whether his career path truly aligned with his values, or was simply the path of least resistance to his parents' approval. This integration work was healthy, necessary, and profoundly healing. But it created a temporary crisis that his therapist hadn't prepared him for. If he was no longer purely identified with the responsible achiever persona, and he was acknowledging his previously shadow parts, then who was he exactly? Jung used a beautiful metaphor for this psychological state. The individual stands at the threshold between 2 worlds. Behind lies the familiar landscape of the persona with all its securities and limitations. Ahead lies unknown territory where the authentic self might emerge. But crossing requires spending time in the void between these worlds, the space where neither the old identity nor the new has full reality. The old motivations that came from persona identification no longer carried emotional charge. The goals that were about proving himself worthy of love, achieving status to secure belonging, or maintaining an image to avoid rejection suddenly felt empty. But the new motivations that would come from authentic self-alignment hadn't crystallized yet. Jung observed that this is why the void feels so profoundly disorienting. Your psyche is literally reorganizing itself around a new center of gravity, not the persona that reacts to external expectations, not the shadow that rebels against those expectations, but what he called the self, the integrated totality of who you are when you're not performing or rebelling, when you're simply being authentically yourself. As Jung wrote, the persona is a complicated system of relations between individual consciousness and society, faultlessly adapted to social conditions, but it is not the self. In the void, you're being asked to release your identification with even the most successful persona and trust that something more authentic and vital lies beneath it. This release feels like death, because in a very real sense, it is death. The death of the identity that has organized your entire adult life. But Jung understood it as the necessary prelude to what he called individuation, the lifelong process of becoming who you actually are rather than who you learn to be. Now we reach the crucial understanding that transforms everything the void forces you to confront the most fundamental question of human existence. Not, what should I do with my life, or how can I be happy? But if I am no longer driven by wounds, achievement, or external validation, then who am I when there's nothing to react against and nothing to prove? This isn't a psychological problem to be solved through techniques or strategies. This is an ontological awakening, a confrontation with the very nature of existence and identity. You're discovering that virtually your entire adult life has been lived in reaction, reacting to childhood wounds, by creating their opposite, reacting to societal expectations by either conforming or rebelling, reacting to survival needs by building security, reacting to loneliness by earning love through performance. But in the void, reaction stops. The stimuli that once triggered your behavior patterns are still there, but they no longer create automatic responses. And in that stopping, in that space between stimulus and response, a profound possibility emerges that most people never encounter: the possibility of authentic action arising from your essential nature rather than from psychological reactivity. Let me return to Brandon's story to illustrate this shift. After months of feeling increasingly disconnected from his legal career, he found himself one evening sitting in his corner office, staring at a brief he couldn't bring himself to complete. The case was significant, the client important, the deadline looming. By all external measures, he should have been motivated. His persona knew exactly what to do: push through, deliver excellence, maintain his reputation. But something had fundamentally changed. The old driver's impressing partners, earning praise, proving his worth, justifying his parents' sacrifices, no longer created forward momentum. I don't want to make partner, he realized with startling clarity. I never did. I wanted to make my father proud, to prove we had succeeded in America, to justify their sacrifices. But that's not my desire. It was never my desire. This wasn't depression speaking. Depression would have been heavy, self-critical, hopeless. This was clarity arising from a place deeper than his psychological patterns. For the first time in his adult life, Brandon was experiencing what Jung called pure being, rather than reactive doing. He wasn't motivated by proving anything, achieving anything, or avoiding anything. He simply was present to reality without the compulsion to change it or escape from it. This is the gateway to individuation, Jung's term for the lifelong process of becoming your authentic self rather than a collection of reactions to your environment and history. Individuation cannot happen while you're still running from pain or chasing external rewards. because both activities keep you in reactive mode, responding to forces outside yourself rather than acting from your own center. Jung observed, wholeness is not achieved by cutting off a portion of one's being, but by integrating the contraries. The void is where this integration happens naturally. You're no longer rejecting your shadow parts or over-identifying with your persona. Instead, you're learning to hold both and everything in between in conscious awareness without being dominated by either. Most people resist this phase intensely because it feels purposeless, and we're conditioned to believe that meaningful life requires constant striving goals, progress, achievement, improvement. Our entire educational system, career structure, and cultural narrative is built around the assumption that human beings need external motivation to be valuable or fulfilled. But individuation begins with what mystics throughout history have called purposeless purpose, being fully yourself, without needing that self to accomplish anything specific for anyone else, or even for your own ego. This is terrifying for the ego mind, which defines itself through action achievement and difference from others. But it's profoundly liberating for what Jung called the self, the deeper organizing principle that simply wants to exist authentically and express its unique nature in the world. Here's the crucial reveal that changes everything. The void isn't empty. It feels empty because you're measuring it against the frenetic activity and emotional intensity of reactive living. But when you learn to inhabit it consciously, you discover it's pregnant with potential. It's the fertile darkness from which your true self emerges, not the self that reacts to the world, but the self that responds to the world from its own authentic center. The void is teaching you the difference between motivation that comes from outside, from wounds, expectations, fears, rewards, and motivation that arises from within, from the simple fact of being alive, being conscious, being you. This inner motivation doesn't feel like the driven intensity you're used to. It feels more like water finding its natural course, like a plant growing toward light, like breath moving in and out without effort. Brandon described it this way: I stopped feeling guilty about not wanting the partnership because I realized guilt was just another form of reaction, reacting to others' expectations of what I should want. When the guilt dropped away, I didn't find emptiness. I found curiosity about what I actually do want, now that I'm free to want it. This curiosity is the beginning of authentic desire that arises from your essential nature, rather than from psychological wounds or social programming. And authentic desire is the foundation of individuation. Here's where everything shifts, where you learn to work with the void instead of against it. But first, you must understand a crucial distinction that most people, and unfortunately many therapists, miss completely: the difference between clinical depression and what I call the sacred void. This distinction matters because if you misdiagnose the void as depression, you'll try to fix it, medicate it, or push through it, which actually interrupts the individuation process that wants to unfold naturally. Depression feels heavy, dense, stuck. It's characterized by rumination, self-criticism, hopelessness, and the sense that nothing will ever change. Depression closes down possibilities and creates psychological paralysis. There's often a quality of self-attack, of feeling fundamentally flawed or broken. Depression says, something is wrong with me, and it will always be wrong. The void, by contrast, feels spacious, open, curious. There's a quality of silence, of potential budding, just beneath the surface of awareness. It's not that nothing matters, it's that old things stop mattering while new meanings gestate in the unconscious like seeds in winter soil. The void opens possibilities, even when you can't yet see what those possibilities are. There's often a quality of waiting, of being on the edge of something undefined but promising. Jeremy, a successful investment banker, described the distinction perfectly. When I was depressed in my 20s, I felt like I was trapped in a dark hole with no way out. But this feeling, what you're calling the void, is completely different. I feel completely indifferent to my career, but instead of panic or self-criticism, I feel curious. Like I'm waiting for something to emerge that I couldn't yet name. Like I'm pregnant with a possibility that hasn't been born yet. This curiosity is the key indicator. In the void, you're not fighting reality or desperately trying to force motivation that isn't there. You're learning what Jung called active waiting, being present to what wants to emerge without forcing outcomes or timelines. Jung wrote, "The greatest burden a child must bear is the unlived life of the parents." This quote illuminates exactly why the void is so necessary in the individuation process. Many of us have been living inherited dreams, carrying forward motivations that were never truly ours, climbing ladders that are leaning against walls we never chose. We inherit our parents' unfinished business. Their need for financial security becomes our workaholism. Their fear of judgment becomes our perfectionism. Their longing for love becomes our people. Pleasing their dreams of success become our achievements that never feel satisfying because they were never authentically ours. The void strips away these inherited motivations with surgical precision. Jeremy realized during his void period that his entire banking career was motivated not by love of finance, but by a deep need to prove financial security, not for himself, but to heal his mother's anxiety about money that had dominated his childhood. His high-achieving lifestyle, his expensive apartment, his designer clothes, his luxury car, all of it was an unconscious attempt to prove to his financially anxious mother that her son was safe, that the family had made it. Once Jeremy recognized this pattern clearly, he could make a conscious choice continue in banking because it authentically aligned with his values and interests, or explore other paths that might be more genuinely his. But first, he had to sit in the void long enough to distinguish his authentic desires from his inherited psychological programming. This is what Jung meant by individuation, becoming conscious of previously unconscious motivations and choosing your path deliberately rather than reactively. It requires the kind of profound stillness and self-examination that only the void provides. The turning point comes when you stop trying to escape the void and start learning from it. Instead of asking, "How do I get my motivation back?" you begin asking, "What is this emptiness teaching me about who I really am beneath all the roles I've been playing?" Instead of, "What's wrong with me?" you ask, "What wants to be born through me that I've never allowed space for?" Instead of, "How do I fix this?" you ask, "How do I listen more deeply to what's trying to emerge?" Jeremy found that when he stopped fighting the void and started inhabiting it consciously, it became a profound teacher. I discovered that my whole life had been organized around doing things to manage other people's emotions, my mother's anxiety, my father's disappointment, my colleagues' competitiveness. I had never asked myself what I actually enjoyed, what energized me, what felt meaningful to me personally. In the spaciousness of the void, Jeremy began to notice subtle preferences and authentic responses that had been completely overshadowed by his reactive patterns. He noticed he felt most alive in conversations about philosophy and meaning, not profit margins. He was drawn to mentoring younger colleagues, not competing with peers. He loved research and analysis, but felt deadened by sales and client management. These weren't dramatic revelations, but quiet recognitions of what had always been true, but never acknowledged. The void had created enough space for his authentic nature to make itself known through subtle feelings, natural attractions, and organic energy patterns rather than through loud mental analysis or emotional intensity. This is how the void works. It doesn't give you answers through thinking. It reveals your authentic nature through felt sense, through what Jung called the wisdom of the body and the intelligence of the unconscious. The turning point is trusting this organic process instead of trying to force it through willpower or technique. Now we enter the heart of the practical work, how to navigate the void consciously and use it as a doorway to individuation rather than a place where you get stuck. This isn't about forcing your way through or rushing the process. It's about learning to partner with the void, to let it teach you what it knows about your authentic nature. The practices I'm about to share aren't designed to end the void quickly that would interrupt the individuation process. Instead, they're designed to help you navigate it consciously, learning its lessons, and allowing your authentic self to emerge organically in its own timing. Shadow dialogue, integration through conversation. Set aside 20-30 minutes daily for what Jung called active imagination, consciously engaging with the different parts of your psyche through internal dialogue. Find a quiet space where you won't be interrupted and begin by speaking directly to your persona, the part of you that has been performing for the world. Thank you for keeping me safe all these years. Thank you for earning love, respect, and success. You did exactly what you were designed to do. You helped me survive and thrive in the world. I honor your service, your intelligence, your dedication. But now I'm choosing to expand beyond just survival and social success. I'm ready to discover who I am when I'm not performing for anyone else's approval. Then turn your attention to your shadow, the parts of yourself that were rejected, hidden, or denied. I see you now. I acknowledge the parts of me that were pushed away because they didn't fit the acceptable image. You hold qualities that I need: my wildness, my authenticity, my deeper truths. I'm ready to listen to what you have to teach me about who I really am. Samantha, a marketing executive and mother of 2, discovered this practice during her own void phase. For 15 years, her identity had centered on competence and control. She was the person everyone turned to for solutions, the mother who had everything organized, the professional who never missed deadlines or dropped balls. But during her void period, she felt completely disinterested in problem solving for herself or others. The thought of planning another family vacation felt exhausting. Managing her team's projects felt meaningless. Even organizing her children's schedules felt like moving through thick water. Through shadow dialogue, Samantha began to recognize that her hyper-competent identity was masking a deep terror of being abandoned if she wasn't constantly useful to others. Her shadow contained a profound longing for rest, for being cared for, rather than always caring for others, for expressing uncertainty, instead of always having answers, for receiving support, instead of always providing it. I realized I hadn't let anyone take care of me since I was 7 years old, Samantha shared. My parents divorced that year, and I became the little helper who made everyone feel better. I carried that role into every relationship, every job, every area of life. No wonder I felt empty. I had no idea who I was when I wasn't fixing something for someone else. Essence meditation, discovering who you are. Beneath the doing. Daily create 15-20 minutes of stillness and ask yourself this fundamental question. Who am I when I'm not performing, achieving, helping, fixing, or trying to be anything for anyone else? Don't try to answer this intellectually. Let responses arise from your body, your breath, your deeper knowing. Samantha found that in these moments of essence awareness, she felt most herself sitting quietly in her garden, hands in soil, watching things grow without her intervention. Not planning the garden, not organizing it, not improving it, just being present to the mystery of growth and life. This wasn't pointing toward a new career as a gardener or a hobby as a botanist. It was revealing a state of being that felt authentically hers, receptive, rather than controlling, wondering, rather than knowing, allowing, rather than forcing. Truth practice, distinguishing authentic response from conditioned reaction. Throughout each day, pause randomly and ask, what is real for me right now? Not what you should feel, not what you think others want you to feel, not what would be appropriate or productive, but what's actually present in your authentic experience this moment. Samantha's truth practice revealed startling discoveries. I realized that I felt most alive and energized in moments of not knowing, of uncertainty, of wonder. This was completely opposite to my persona identity as the person who always had answers and solutions. My authentic self loved questions more than answers, mystery more than certainty, exploration more than conclusions, purposeless purpose, activities without outcome goals. Regularly engage in activities with no improvement agenda, no productivity purpose, no achievement goal. Samantha started taking walks without destinations, cooking without following recipes, drawing without trying to create art, having conversations without trying to help or advise. These activities created space for her authentic self to express without the pressure of performance or results. I discovered that when I wasn't trying to be good at something or accomplish something, a different part of me emerged, more playful, more spontaneous, more curious, more alive. Energy tracking, following your natural rhythm. Pay attention to what gives you energy versus what drains you, but don't track this based on old assumptions. Samantha was surprised to discover that many activities she thought she enjoyed, planning parties, organizing family events, leading work projects, actually depleted her, while activities she'd never valued, sitting quietly, observing nature, having meandering conversations about meaning, energized her profoundly. Desire archaeology, uncovering buried authentic wants. Spend time excavating desires you buried long ago because they seemed impractical, selfish, or impossible. Samantha rediscovered a childhood love of astronomy that she'd abandoned when her parents said it wasn't a real career. She began stargazing again, not as preparation for a career change, but as connection to a part of herself that had been dormant for decades. Over months of consistent practice, Samantha noticed something remarkable. I stopped feeling guilty about not wanting to be everyone's solution provider, because I realized that guilt was just my persona trying to maintain control. When the guilt dropped away, I didn't find emptiness. I found deep contentment in simply being present to life as it unfolded. The practices revealed that Samantha's deepest joy came not from solving problems, but from witnessing beauty. Not from being needed, but from being present. Not from having answers, but from living comfortably with questions. Jung wrote, "The privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are." The void creates the necessary space for this becoming, but it requires patience, trust, and what contemplatives call holy waiting, being present to the process without forcing outcomes or rushing toward premature conclusions. Remember, you're not broken for being in the void. You're participating in one of the most important psychological processes humans can experience, the birth of authentic selfhood from the dissolution of false identity. As we reach the culmination of our journey together, I want you to understand something. that could transform not just how you navigate the void, but how you understand your entire spiritual and psychological development. The void is not a problem to be solved, a phase to be endured, or a stopping point where stuck people remain. It is a sacred threshold, the liminal space where the most profound transformation available to human consciousness occurs. You see, most people spend their entire lives oscillating between two psychological poles, chasing what they think they want based on conditioning and wounds, or running from what they fear based on past pain and social programming. But individuation, Jung's term for becoming authentically yourself, requires a third possibility that very few people ever discover: learning to be present to what is, without the compulsive need to change it, escape it, or use it to validate your worth. The void teaches you this presence. It strips away external motivations, inherited dreams, reactive patterns, and survival-based drives, until you discover the motivation that comes from the simple fact of being alive, being conscious, being uniquely you, being present to the mystery and beauty of existence itself. This isn't passive emptiness, it's dynamic stillness. It's not the absence of energy, but the presence of a different kind of energy that doesn't come from getting something or avoiding something or proving something. It comes from what Jung called the self, the organizing principle of your authentic nature that exists prior to all the roles, reactions, and identities you've accumulated. Let me leave you with your 7-day integration roadmap, not to fix or escape the void, but to navigate it consciously and learn what it wants to teach you about your authentic nature. Day 1, Shadow Dialogue Foundation. Spend 20 minutes in conversation with your persona. Thank it for its service, acknowledge its intelligence, and gently explain that you're expanding beyond performance-based identity. Ask it what it's afraid will happen if you stop trying to earn love through achievement. Day 2, Shadow Integration. Continue the dialogue with your rejected parts. What qualities, desires, or aspects of yourself did you exile to maintain social acceptance? Speak to these parts with curiosity and respect, rather than judgment or fear. Day 3, 4. Truth Practice. Intensification. Set random alarms throughout each day. When they sound, pause and ask, what is real for me right now? Notice the difference between authentic response and conditioned reaction. Don't judge what you discover. Simply notice. Day 5. Essence Meditation. Deep Dive. Spend 30 minutes asking, who am I when I'm not trying to be anything for anyone else? Let answers arise from your body, breath, and felt sense rather than from mental analysis. If nothing comes, practice being comfortable with not knowing. Day 6. Purposeless Activity. Engage in something you enjoy with absolutely no agenda for improvement, productivity, or achievement. Walk without destinations. Draw without trying to create art. Cook without following recipes. Notice what emerges when performance pressure is absent. Day 7. Integration and Commitment. Reflect on the week. What did you discover about your authentic nature? What old motivations are losing their grip? What subtle new energies are beginning to emerge? Make one small commitment to honor what you've learned about your true self. This work requires discernment. If you're experiencing thoughts of self-harm, persistent hopelessness lasting more than 2 weeks, inability to function in basic daily activities, or suicidal ideation, please reach out to a mental health professional immediately. The void I'm describing feels spacious, curious, and full of potential, not dark, dangerous, or hopeless. Also recognize that individuation is a lifetime process, not a weekend workshop or quick fix. Be patient with yourself. The void may last weeks, months, or longer. Trust that your psyche knows its own timing for this profound transformation. Remember, you're learning to distinguish between depression, heavy stuck, hopeless self-critical, and the sacred void, spacious curious, pregnant with possibility peaceful. If you're unsure which you're experiencing, please consult with a therapist familiar with depth psychology and Jung's work. Jung's final insight brings us full circle and offers profound hope for this journey. He wrote, "In the depths of winter, I finally learned that within me there lay an invincible summer. Your void is that winter necessary fallow, preparing the psychological ground for new growth that couldn't happen any other way. The invincible summer isn't something you achieve through effort or earn through good behavior. It's something you remember something. You are beneath all the roles, reactions, identities, and performances you've worn to survive and succeed in the world. It's your essential nature which has been waiting patiently beneath all the noise for the right conditions to emerge. The void creates those conditions. It provides the silence necessary to hear your own authentic voice beneath the chorus of external expectations. It offers the emptiness necessary for your true fullness to reveal itself. It gives you the pause necessary to choose consciously rather than react automatically. I want to hear from you. Share your experience in the comments. Have you ever felt the void, and what has it taught you about your authentic self? Or if you're in it now, what are you discovering about who you are when you're not trying to be anything for anyone else? Your story might be exactly what someone else needs to hear to understand that they're not broken, not failing, not regressing. They're transforming. Sometimes the most powerful healing happens when we realize we're not alone in our experience. The void is calling you home to yourself, not to a new and improved version of your old self, but to who you actually are when you stop trying to be anything else. Trust the process. Trust the emptiness. Trust that in the space between who you were and who you're becoming, your authentic self is already emerging, has always been. Emerging is simply waiting for you to create enough inner stillness to recognize its presence. You're not lost. You're found. You're not broken. You're breaking open. You're not failing at life. You're succeeding at the most important task any human can undertake, becoming who you truly are. The void is not your enemy. It's your teacher, your guide, your sacred threshold into authenticity. Walk through it consciously and discover what Jung called the treasure that lies in the depths. Your own incomparable, irreplaceable, authentic self.